One from Maggie Elliott here. How many drafts does it take for you to hone a piece of work into something that you think is ready to submit to publishers?
About 40 to 50.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a lot of drafts.
It is, but I'm one of these people that edits as I go.
Yeah.
So I'll do the first bit, and then I'll go back and I'll redo it, and then I'll go a bit further, and then I'll go back, and then I'll redo it.
Yeah.
So by the time I get to the end of the first draft, I've probably done about 25 edits. I would, runs through it. It's not a rewrite every single time.
Yeah, it's just.
But it's tweaking it and fiddling with it, and then it goes to my writing group for critique. We've got there's 6 of us at the moment. We have a maximum of 8, and we meet up every couple of weeks and discuss. Well, at the moment we're doing it on Zoom, but usually it's face to face, and we discuss each other's work, and then I'll come back and think about what they've said. Sometimes I'll agree with it, sometimes I won't, but you tweak it and improve the work. Since I've been doing it like that, my publishing success rate's gone up massively, because they spot when you go through a story 25 times, you get so close to it, you sometimes lose sight of what you were trying to do with it, and then they can point out where the problems are.
Yeah.
I then send, once I've made their changes, I send it over to Langers, who's a friend of mine, who's into the style of stuff I do, which is like humorous fantasy, and he gives me his feedback. I then tweak it a bit further, and then I'll start submitting it to publishers. And then when I come to do a book like I've done for you guys, they all get edited again, because when you're doing a book, you've got to think about the collection sitting together properly, so you have to tweak it further. So sometimes it's something simple, like there are 2 old lady characters in the books in 2 separate stories, and they were both called Ethel.
Yeah.
So I changed one of them to Ida, because they're not the same character, and I didn't want the readers to get confused.
Yeah.
And sometimes you just spot problems that you haven't spotted before, so you fix them, and then I send it over to Ed, my editor called Ed.
Ed, the editor.
He's another good friend of mine who's a writer.
And I met him at the lodge, didn't I?
That's right, yeah, you did.
Lovely
and
man.
he'll go through and pick up the stuff that I miss, like split infinitives and where the punctuation's wrong and things like that, before I submit it to someone like you guys. So
I guess,
in all, it probably is up to 100 times, I reckon.
That's a lot. Do you reckon that's just you? That's the way you'd like to do it? Or do you think that most writers kind of go through it that many times?
I think a lot of successful writers edit a lot, yeah.
Yeah.
There are exceptions to the rule, like Stephen King. I think he just bangs it out and doesn't really, he goes back and edits, but I don't think he does it that many times.
Right, so my next question, this is a bit of a long one, so you have to bear with me. This is from John D. Hello, John. Given the digital age short attention span, notwithstanding lockdown, I guess that's because everybody's currently spending more time invested, do you think that short story collections will garner greater popularity, possibly alongside the novella and novelette?
I'd hope so. I really hope so.
Yeah.
Historically, short stories haven't sold as well. People tend to prefer reading a novel rather than reading short stories.
Yeah.
So I would hope so. I think the internet and people's attention spans are certainly making them more popular with writers and readers.
Do you think there's a reason why people don't like short stories? Because I used to like reading short stories when I was younger.
Yeah, I've always loved them. Roald Dahl's another one which I didn't get to mention earlier, and I love his short stories. They're brilliant.
Yeah.
And I tend to read them more than I do his books.
I wonder if there's like a bit of a misconception that short stories are kind of like children's books rather than adult.
Yeah, maybe. Or maybe people just don't think there's as much to find in a short story as there is in a longer piece. But there are. I mean, films get based on them a lot. Philip K. Dick's short stories. Minority Report was one of them, which Spielberg did. That was a short one.
I'm sure you can say the same. I've read plenty of long books that are not worth the time and effort to read. Yeah. Like you get to the end and like, why? And and I've read plenty of short stories that I would read again and again and again just because they're amazing.
Yeah. They're good from the point of view that they don't waste so much of your time if you don't like it. And But I still think most people do prefer to read a longer book, and maybe it's because they get invested in it, and I don't know. I don't know the reason really.
Maybe
But
you should do it
historically, they've
today.
always sold a lot better.
John also asks, do you recommend doing an audio version? What's your opinion on audiobooks?
Well, yes. And I had the studio, as you know, I had the studio booked to do an audio version of my book just before all this stuff kicked off.
Yes.
And then the studio closed about a week before we were supposed to be recording it. So I deal with a few blind writers, and they've always asked me to make audio versions of books. It does cost a bit, and you've got to make sure that it's worth it from that point of view, I suppose.
I think that it's a good thing to do audiobooks. I think people do forget that there are people out there who, either because they want to read audio, I've got friends who read audiobooks while they're doing other stuff in the background. Yeah. I've got friends who can't read a standard book, and they like having audiobooks. I think everybody just forgets about them in the genre. They go, well, normal people read, everybody reads, that's fine, and they just kind of swipe anybody else under the carpet that might need or want an audiobook.
Yeah, but I think they're growing in popularity from what I've seen. A lot of my friends listen to them rather than reading now, because they can do it on their commute, or I don't know. I guess you don't have to concentrate quite so much because it's right in your ear.
Yeah,
I'm making this up. I don't actually know, but I would assume.
I've got a friend who he listens to audiobooks while he's playing computer games, and if it's not a mind, like a really consuming game, he'll just play the game while he has an audiobook
while listening. Yeah, and just driving around. I mean, because I do a bit of driving work for a bakery to supplement my income, and I'm always listening to stuff in the van there, because why not?
Do you think that the rise of podcasts may have had an influence on the popularity of audiobooks?
Definitely, yeah. I think people are just turning to all sorts of different media now.
Yeah.
Now they're spoiled for choice. You can do what suits you best.
Yeah.
So from the point of view of a writer, it is better to make your work available across as many mediums as you possibly can, so that you capture the largest audience. That's the kind of way I've always looked at it. Yeah. I don't like ebooks. I like to have a physical book in my hand that I can turn the pages of. But I sell more ebooks than I do printed books through the self-publishing stuff I do. So
yeah. I prefer a physical book, but I find having ebooks. I mean, I use ebooks for books that I'm not sure of that I want to buy because it's slightly cheaper, and for holidays because it's so easy. Yeah. I could take a full suitcase for a book, so I could take this one little tiny skinny tablet.
Yeah, with a library on it, exactly.
Yeah.
So, very early on, I decided to do it as best I could across as many mediums as possible. With the audiobooks, I haven't done it up until now, because when you're self-publishing, you don't tend to sell as many books.
Yeah.
But now I'm working with you guys, I definitely want to get an audiobook out there just so we can try advertising against it and see what happens with it. It's an experiment.
Was I correct that you were going to do the voicing for the audiobook?
I'm going to do a lot of it, yeah. I thought, so quite a lot of the stuff, because they're all short stories and there's zillions of different characters because there's so many short stories.
Yeah.
I didn't want to voice all of it myself, so I've got a friend of mine called Mark Rutherford, who's in my writing group. He's a brilliant story performer, so he's going to do some of it. My brother's going to do a little bit.
Nice.
And a friend of mine called Alison, she can do all the ones that are told from a female point of view. Because my lady voice is quite good, but,
I love, as long as you do Definite Superhero on the audio, because that is made for you, and I love listening to you read that. I love listening to it at the lunch. I love watching it again on the video you sent me the other day. I think your audio for that is amazing.
I'm going to do that one myself, and then the others will be a bit more diverse in the way they're presented, just to make it more interesting. Really, I wanted to, make it fun to listen to.
Yes. Excellent. Okay, and John has one last question. To what degree should a collection of short stories conform to a single theme or pattern?
I think that is a little bit subjective, and it depends on the publisher that you're dealing with or approaching and what they're looking for. But based on my experience, I think it's better to have a theme that holds the stories together. So the collection you've published has got a very definite theme about it. It's all about death. and the styles, you know, it's still fairly diverse the way the stories are told within there,
Yeah.
but there is something that ties them all together. When I submitted my first collection, I was invited by Ink Tears to put a collection together, which had some of those stories in it, but it had some other ones as well. And they rejected the collection because they felt it was too diverse and there wasn't anything holding it together.
Right.
While you could look at each story and say, yeah, it's a good story, as a book, they thought they'd have real trouble selling it, and therefore they rejected it. So I guess that kind of proves that maybe you do need something to actually make a book feel complete when
Yeah.
it's got a collection of stories in it. You know, you think some of the ones I've mentioned already, like Roald Dahl, Tales of the Unexpected, they were all tales with a twist, weren't they?
Yeah.
And he did a lot of war ones that sit very well together based on his experience in the First and Second World War. And you know, even like the Conan stories, they're all
Yeah.
about Conan. So
Yeah.
they fit together for that reason. So you could have a central character, you could have a central theme. I think you need to think about that because it does make a book more likely to be published, I'd say. Well, what do you guys think when you get submissions like that?
I'll be honest, we've only had one collection, which was yours. Myself, I've only ever read books that have, I mean, we have published some of our own anthologies and short story collections, and they have had a theme, but we set those themes as a competition.
Yeah.
So that's slightly different, and I don't get to choose books. it's Consuelo that makes the final decisions. But I think I'd probably agree as a reader, I'd like to know that I'm picking up a book and going, this is about death. Okay, it's funny, it's about death, and that's what I'm reading, rather than going, it's about death, and it's also about Britney Spears, and it's also about flowers. Like, that'd be a completely random thing. I wouldn't be able to pick it up and go, this is what I want.
Giving me ideas now.
Britney Spears and flowers and death. So, yeah, I think a pattern or a theme is probably good. And I'm still quite new to the world of publishing, but if I was to choose, I'd agree with you. I'd probably choose something that at least had a thread of something to go through and that you can pick it up.
The better collections I've read have all got that. Even back with Philip K. Dick, it was all sci-fi, and it was quite often robots. There was some form of robot within the story.
Yeah.
So or artificial intelligence. He wrote a lot of stuff about that as well.
It can definitely be diverse. I mean, this is kind of going off books a little bit, but I mean, I've seen short animated collection clips, and the title is Love, Death and Robots. You just brought it into my head then. And the styles of each individual story was completely different from during the animation and the conversation. But like you say, because there was a theme to it, or the three things, you enjoyed reading it or you enjoyed watching it because they're linked together and you know what you're getting.
Yeah.
People like that.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you for that, John. I've got a question here from Antonio Salia. Do you normally shape your pieces based on competitions and magazine requirements beforehand?
It varies. To some extent. If I want to get published in a certain magazine, then I will research it and definitely keep in mind what they publish when I'm writing. I'm trying it at the moment with the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, which is an incredibly popular, long-standing, well-respected publication in the States. And I've been rejected a few times so far, but I'm going to keep going with it. But I've read quite a lot of their back ones, and they do deal with humour.
Yeah.
Tends to be slightly more American than English, just because they're published in America. So I've got to watch my quirkiness when I submit to them. So yes, I do. But now I'm further down the line and I've got a very definite style that I like to write in.
Yeah.
It's a mix really. It's a mix of what I want to write and just bearing in mind where I'm going to submit it to. I think it's important to do that because I run to Hull and Back, which is a fairly popular short story competition, and that is a humorous writing competition.
Yeah.
And every year I'll receive stories that are not funny. It's not me not understanding the humour. They're quite often very good. I received quite a good horror story last time, but there wasn't any humour in it at all. So it doesn't matter how well written it is, I'm not going to
You're not going to put it up there.
select it.
Not
No. And there was another one that was very literary. I think it was about Alzheimer's, and that was a brilliantly written story, but there was no humour in there, and therefore I'm never going to select it. So it's just, I don't know, just researching. If you do a bit of research and understand who you're submitting to, I think it can help you a lot, especially if you want to see your work published.
Yeah. Okay, excellent. We kind of asked this question earlier with your childhood experience, but this one is from Paul Mast, and he goes, "What influenced you to write about fantasy?" You mentioned the experience earlier with the writing about death because you thought about death as a child a little bit, but did that influence the writing about fantasy bit as well?
I don't think so. I've always been drawn to making things up. Even as a kid, I used to be quite inventive with stories and music and all sorts of different stuff.
Yeah.
And I've always been drawn to, like Hitchhikers and Pratchett, where it's complete fantasy. And Lord of the Rings as well. I didn't mention that one, did I? That's a brilliant book.
Five.
I know. I keep picking more. I'm sneaking them in there as we're going along. But no, I find I like the escapism that it offers, which is why I've always read it. I prefer to read that than I do real life stuff, even like thrillers and things, which they're made up but set in the real world. I don't find them as interesting as things that are set somewhere else.
No, it's nice to imagine that there's another universe somewhere and everything's just a bit topsy-turvy and different. And
yeah,
I like fantasy myself as well. Probably why I enjoyed your book so much. I've always enjoyed fantasy.
Yeah, but I also like it because some of the stories in the book, they're set in the real world, but they've got a fantastical element, like there's a demon in it.
Yeah.
And Tom Holt's another very good writer who does that. He quite often introduces fantasy into the real world. And so I like both sides of it.
Excellent. Okay. Right. This is the name that we practiced pronouncing earlier, and I've already forgotten how to pronounce it. So this is Leslie Truchet.
Truchet, I think.
Truchet.
It's a French name, so I'm going with a French kind of twang. Truchet.
I'll blame you if I've got it wrong.
Okay.
So, tell us about your most recently published book and what was the inspiration behind it.
This. And I think I've talked about that already.
I know.
I mean, the stories were written over a very long time, so I think the first one was 2011-ish. So it's about 8 years worth of cherry picking of short stories that sit together well.
Yeah.
And
it
was something I'd always wanted to do. So
is it more of a thing if you'd written the stories over the years and finally you had enough and you're like, right, there's my collection?
Yeah, I suppose. Well, it was after I got rejected from submitting to Ink Tears, and they cherry-picked a few to put in a collection where I was in it with 3 other authors, that got me thinking. I looked at the ones they'd picked, and then went back through and started thinking about what would actually make a decent short story collection, and that's how I came up with those. Excellent. And I wrote a couple more just before I submitted it to you to finish it. So yeah,
Fair enough. Like you say, we've probably actually discussed that one a little bit. This one is a bit different. Do you have a favourite or least favourite character, and what is it you like or dislike about them?
There are so many in that book. That's a really tough one, that is. If I had to pick a favourite, probably there's an old lady in the Ninja Zombie Knitting Circle called Ethel Eccles. She's the main character in that.
Yes, I like that.
And I've always pictured Judi Dench playing her, with Maggie Smith and Julie Walters being the ninja and the zombie on the sofa doing the knitting. But Ethel was actually based on my great-grandmother, Ellen Eccles. And I changed it to Ethel because I just thought it fitted the story better. But she is my great-granny, right down to the slipper boots with the zip on it and the knitting. When I was a little kid, my great-grandmother lived with my grandmother, and I called my granny, big granny, which did not go down well at all, and my great grandmother, little granny, because obviously she was older and smaller, and I always used to run up there because she had sweets in her bedroom, and I'd sit and have a humbug with her while she did her knitting, and that was a big inspiration for that story. I can still picture it now. So I suppose for that reason, maybe that's my favourite one.
Yeah.
Also, there's a couple of others. Colin, who's the demon. I love Colin the demon. He's on the front cover, sitting next to Ethel, funnily enough. Let's show people.
Colin
this
and
is
Ethel.
my great granny as a zombie, and this is Colin. And there's another one called Rage, which is a nod to David Gemmell, who's a brilliant writer of heroic fantasy. And in my favourite series of his books, which I think is called the Regante series. I don't know how you pronounce Regante, whether it's Regante or Regante. But there's a really old gladiator in that series called Rage, and the lead character in the Troll story is called Rage as a nod to him.
Yeah, that's cool.
So that's another favourite. I'll stop there because I've picked 3 and there's only 1.
That's okay. I was just going to say, do you have a character that you dislike?
Oh, there was one I wrote back in that thriller that was a paedophile, and it made me so uncomfortable writing that character.
Yeah.
He's definitely my least favourite character, and I killed him off in a horrible way as well.
Good.
I didn't enjoy writing him at all. It was horrible.
That's an interesting one. I mean, like, it's one thing to write a character and then you're just like, you're just a dick of a character, excuse my French. And then there's another thing actually having to write a character that kind of like really conflicts with you as a person. How come you ended up writing that character?
Because the story needed it.
Right.
It was part of the conflict within the story.
Yeah.
And the situation never described anything graphically or anything like that, but you still had to kind of think about, well, why would he react like this paedophile?
Yeah.
And it was horrible. So he ended up being quite a small part within that book. He was it was a necessary part of the book because it added to the tension of the lead character completely losing his rag.
Yeah.
And it built up to a point where, it was a tool for that, really. But I certainly wouldn't choose to write about that again.
No, that makes sense, and it makes sense that it's a hard character to write. I'm glad that it's a hard character to write.
Totally. I think there's no harm in putting yourself outside of your comfort zone as a writer sometimes.
Yeah.
But that was just unpleasant.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't do it again.
And okay, we'll end on a lighter note, and this is from Angela Goth.
I think Goth. Yeah.
I was thinking, is it like the Van Gogh or Van Gogh or?
Yeah.
And you I felt like you touched on this a little bit when you're talking about you to Fulham back, people sending in stories that just aren't funny. So even though it's meant to be a funny competition, so is comedy and silliness something that you have always been able to express and make other people laugh? Or can it be learned? And how do you know what will be funny and make people laugh?
Well, in answer to the last bit, you don't know. It's so subjective. I mean, anything creative is, but humour is. What will make one person roll around on the floor laughing won't even draw a smile from someone else, and you just have to accept that, I think.
Yeah.
I've always been drawn to it. I've always liked laughing, and I remember my grandfather used to love the Pink Panther.
Yeah.
So the cartoons of the Pink Panther and also Peter Clouseau films. And I remember how much he enjoyed them and the way he laughed. It was so infectious that I think ever since then I've always enjoyed laughing at things.
Yeah.
And my grandmother and my dad, he's the same. They're all like it.
Do you think
it's good to be able to laugh?
Do you think it can be a learned thing, or do you think it's kind of one of those things you've got it or you've not got it?
I think you can learn how to express it through what you write. It took me a while because you can, especially with fantasy, it's very easy to overwrite, which is one of my problems. I quite often have to go through and chop great big bits out. But it's hard to make the humour sit in there naturally when you're writing a story. It's not like doing a stand-up routine. It's a totally different medium. So you've got to think about how to put it in there in a way where it complements the story rather than overshadowing it. So what I usually do is give the character a sense of humour,
Yeah.
and it's the way whoever's narrating it observes what's happening, or the take they, the way they react to how other people say things and do things, that actually brings the humour to the situation. So I think that's how I approach it, but it would be different for everybody.
Yeah, I don't think I don't think I'm funny. So I don't think I'd be very good at the writing funny.
Yeah.
I'm the kind of person that likes jokes like what's naughty and sits in a corner. What's red and naughty and sits in a corner?
I don't know.
A naughty strawberry.
That's very good. What's brown and sticky?
A stick!
Yes! Well done. You
What'd
saw
you get
through
hanging
that
from
one.
trees?
I don't know.
Sore arms. I'll be honest, I stole them all from Alan Davis and QI. Right, that is all the questions that I wrote down and I've got.
Okay.
I very much enjoyed chatting with you. It's been fun to have a little insight into you and your writing and the kind of things that you like to do. So yes, I will say ta-ra for now.
Ta-ra. Thank you very much.